The glass hit the floor before she knew she'd dropped it. Wren Calloway did not drop things. 6 years behind this bar, 3 packs worth of tension managed across these tables, and her hands had never once failed her. But he had walked through that door, the same man who walked through every Tuesday, the same worn jacket, the same quiet, and something in her chest had cracked open like a window she hadn't known was latched. She did not understand it yet. Her hands knew first, the warmth that moved up from her palms when he settled onto his stool. The way her wolf, always calm, always hers, went still in a manner that was nothing like calm at all. Not the stillness of safety, the stillness of recognition. Her body had already made a decision she hadn't been asked about. She swept up the glass. She kept her face exactly where she needed it. She had built this place on the principle that she belonged to no one, no pack, no rank, no claim. The Howling Pint was neutral ground because Wren Calloway was neutral ground. That was the only reason 3 packs could share one valley without drawing blood. And now this. With a man who doesn't know yet what he's already done. With a woman who does. Chapter 1. The clochard table had been trouble since 8 o'clock. Not fighting trouble. The worst kind, the low, territorial hum of 3 wolves who had been drinking since before they arrived, and were now testing the room's edges the way wolves do when they think no one is managing them. Wren was managing them. She had been managing them for 40 minutes without appearing to do anything at all. A word here, a refill there. The careful geography of where she positioned herself when she moved through the floor. This was the work, not the pouring, the reading. She set 2 pints in front of the Dunmore regulars at the near end of the bar, Canal and his brother, who came every Tuesday and argued about the same fishing contract they had been arguing about for 3 years. They didn't need her attention. They needed a surface to argue across. The door opened at 9:30. She knew it was Finn Darcy before she turned around. Same time every Tuesday, 80-something Tuesdays, give or take. She had stopped counting because counting implied she was tracking it, and she wasn't tracking it. He took his stool, 3rd from the left. She pulled his pint without being asked and set it in front of him, and that was the whole of their transaction, the same as always, and she turned back to the clochard table. Then she stopped. Something was different. She couldn't locate it. The bar was the same, the amber low-light, the smell of old oak and hops, and the particular damp wool scent of wolves who'd come in from a cold evening. The clochard wolves were talking at the right volume now, which meant her earlier management had held. Canal had apparently lost the fishing argument and was buying the next round as penance. Nothing had changed, except that she was aware of exactly where Finn Darcy was sitting without looking at him. Not aware the way you're aware of a problem. Aware the way you're aware of a fire, because the heat has a direction and your body has already mapped it. She filed it under fatigue and kept moving. The clochard wolves called for another round at 9:45. She brought it over. The one nearest the window, a broad, humorless wolf named Ruairi Clochard, whose opinion of the bar had always contained a faint note of tolerance, as though he was doing her a favor by drinking here, watched her set the glasses down. "Quiet night," he said. "Tuesday," she said. He made a sound that wasn't agreement or disagreement. She moved away before it could become a conversation. At the bar, she reached past Finn for the shelf behind, pulling a bottle to refill the optic. Her arm passed within a foot of his shoulder. Not close, professionally distanced. She had the optic refilled and the bottle replaced in under 10 seconds. Her hands were steady. Her wolf was not. Something low in her chest had gone strange and warm, and she recognized the sensation the way you recognize a word in a language you studied once and mostly forgot, not understanding it, but knowing you should. She set the bottle down. She moved to the other end of the bar. She served Canal's next round and smiled at something his brother said, and the smile was real because she was good at this. She did not look at the third stool from the left. At 10:15, the clochard table settled their tab. Ruari put on his coat slowly, the way men do when they want to be watched leaving. Ren watched him leave. That was also the work. At 10:30, Canal and his brother went. The bar held two other wolves she didn't know well, a breen couple, passing through, nearly done. She let them finish without pressure. At 11, Finn's glass was empty. She refilled it. "How's the valley treating you?" she said. Not really a question, the shape of one. "Same as last week," he said. "That's either good or bad." "Tuesday," he said, and something in the corner of his mouth moved. She turned away, but the warmth in her chest had a new weight now, a specific gravity, pulling toward the third stool from the left, and she recognized, with the clarity of someone who reads rooms for a living, that this was not fatigue. She did not let herself name what it was. The breen couple left at 11:20. She wiped the table, reset the chairs, heard Finn's coat shift on the back of his stool as he stood. She was looking at the table. "Night," he said. "Night," she said. She heard the door. She turned around. He was gone. The stool was empty. The bar was hers again, the way it always was at close, silent and known and exactly as she had built it. She moved through the closing routine, wiped the oak, checked the taps, turned off the back lights. She put both hands flat on the bar and stood there. Name it, she told herself. Name what that was. The bar gave nothing back. The oak was cool under her palms. Outside, the valley was doing what it always did, existing, patient, indifferent to whatever was happening inside one woman's chest on a Tuesday night in November. She couldn't name it. She moved to the door. His jacket was on the back of the stool. She picked it up. The wax cotton was cold and it smelled like wood smoke and something underneath that she didn't examine. She stood there longer than the action required. Then she folded it over her arm and set it behind the bar. She turned off the last light. She did not examine why she hadn't hung it by the door. Chapter 2. She had the jacket on the bar before she heard the door. Not folded neatly, positioned. There was a difference and she knew it, the difference between leaving something out and placing it so that the transaction would be quick, clean, and over. She had opened at noon as usual. She had prepped the bar as usual. She had not thought about the jacket. The jacket had been folded and repositioned twice. Finn Darcy did not come in on Wednesdays. She heard his boots on the stone step, and her hands moved to the glass. She was polishing, and she was polishing it when he came through the door. And the whole sequence had taken less than 4 seconds, and she was not going to think about that either. He stopped when he saw the jacket on the bar. Something in his face shifted, not surprise. Something quieter than surprise. "You knew I'd come back for it," he said. "It's your jacket," she said. He crossed to the bar. He picked it up. His hand closed around the collar, and for a moment his fingers and hers were separated by 4 inches of worn wax cotton, and she felt the heat from his skin as though the air between them had thinned. Her wolf lurched. She turned to the shelf behind her, checked nothing in particular, rearranged 2 bottles that did not need rearranging. By the time she turned back, her face was where she needed it. "Wednesday," he said. He hadn't moved toward the door. "You're open Wednesdays now." "I've always been open Wednesdays." He set the jacket on the stool beside him instead of putting it on. She registered this. She reached under the bar and pulled a clean glass and poured him a Guinness and set it in front of him, and the glass was on the bar and her hand was back at her side before she understood she hadn't been asked. She had poured it the way you pour a drink for someone who is staying. The silence between them had a different weight than usual. Their usual silence was functional, the silence of two people who had an efficient arrangement and respected each other's time. This silence had texture. It pressed. "There's a breen wolf," she said. "Young, been coming in Thursday evenings for the past month. Sits alone, nurses one drink for 2 hours." Finn's hands were around his glass. He didn't reach for his phone, didn't produce a notebook. He just listened. The way he always listened, like the information mattered more than what he did with it. "Name," he said. "Haven't asked." "Description." "Mid-20s, brown hair, comes in on foot, which means he's local or staying local. Left-handed." She paused. "He folds his coaster into quarters every time." Finn turned his glass a half-rotation on the bar. "I'll find him." She nodded. That was usually the end of it. The pipeline, as she privately thought of it, her observations, his follow-through, no paperwork, no pack meeting, no wolf left to fall through cracks in silence. 2 years of Tuesdays had built something functional, and they both understood its shape. But he didn't leave. He took a slow pull of his pint. She moved to the other end of the bar and did things that needed doing. Logged a delivery. Reconciled a tab from the weekend. The bar held no one else, a Wednesday afternoon in November, and the fire was going, and the light was the color of old whiskey, and she was acutely, persistently aware of the warmth at the left end of the bar where Finn Darcy was sitting in a silence that had stopped being professional 20 minutes ago. She could feel him the way you feel a low note, not heard, just present in the chest. He stayed for the 1 pint. He left before 3. He said goodbye, and she said goodbye, and the door closed and the bar exhaled. She stood at the sink with her hands in water that had gone cold, and she stared at the middle distance for a long moment. Then she dried her hands and picked up her phone and called Dara. Dara answered on the second ring. "Tell me." Wren told her. She used clinical language, the way she always handled things she didn't want to hold directly. Proximity response, scent sensitivity, involuntary tracking, atypical awareness of a specific individual across varied distances. She listed the symptoms the way she'd recite an inventory. Dara was quiet for a moment. "Wren," she said. "Don't. That's a mate bond." Wren hung up. She stood in the bar. The fire had settled into low, steady heat. The stool where he'd sat was still slightly angled from when he'd stood. He never pushed them back square. She had noticed this. She had apparently been noticing a great number of things about Finn Darcy without registering that she was doing it, and that alone was its own kind of indictment. She looked at the stool. "Absolutely not," she said to no one. The bar didn't answer. She went to the back counter and pulled out the ledger, the soft-covered notebook, where she kept her welfare observations, the quiet record of who had been in, who hadn't, who had sat wrong in their body, who had drunk too carefully or not carefully enough. 2 years of Tuesdays. 2 years of handing this information to Finn Darcy in 30-second exchanges that she had always told herself were about the valley and not about the man. She stared at the ledger for a long time. She closed it. She put it in the drawer beneath the register, not her usual drawer, the one she used daily, but the one further in, the one that required her to lean down and pull hard because the wood had swollen in the damp. She pushed it shut. The ledger sat in the dark where she couldn't see it. The stool was still slightly angled. She left it that way. Chapter 3. The answer came back worse than she'd calculated. Wren had spent Thursday and Friday making calls. Not emotional calls, structured ones. She knew 2 independent wolves operating in other territories. A woman named Britton who ran a mediation service in Sligo, and a man named Cathal who'd been unaffiliated for 11 years and knew pack law better than most pack lawyers. She had asked both of them the same question, framed as a hypothetical, and both of them had given her the same answer in different words. A bond to a ranked pack wolf created affiliation by proximity and loyalty, not by choice, not by paperwork, by the fact of the bond itself. Convention did not require a ceremony or a declaration. It required the bond to exist. Britain had been kind about it. Cathal had not bothered with kindness, which Wren had appreciated more. He'd said, "The moment two packs can prove the bond is active, any neutrality claim becomes contestable. Not immediately void. Contestable, which in pack law means the same thing, just slower." She had thanked them both and ended the calls, and sat at her kitchen table for a long time. The Howling Pint was neutral because Wren Calloway was neutral. She had registered as an independent wolf in Dunmore Valley 10 years ago for exactly this reason. No pack claim, no loyalty hierarchy, no reason for any wolf from Clochar or Breen to suspect that the pint she pulled them carried an agenda. That structure was not built on paperwork. It was built on her biology staying uncomplicated. Tuesday came. She was ready. She had decided what Tuesday would look like: efficient, professional, the same transaction it had always been. She had spent 2 days building the architecture of a normal Tuesday in her head, and she was going to inhabit it without deviation. Finn came in at 9:30. She pulled his pint, set it in front of him, moved away. She served the Clochar table. She checked on the 2 Breen wolves near the fire. She restocked the middle shelf. She did all of this without once letting her attention settle on the 3rd stool from the left, which required more concentration than running the entire rest of the bar combined. The pull was worse than last week. Not stronger in a dramatic sense. Worse in the sense of being more specific. Her body had apparently catalogued him in the intervening days and was now capable of registering his position in the room with a precision that had nothing to do with her eyes. She kept her movements clean. She kept her face neutral. She was good at this. She had built her livelihood on being good at this. His glass was empty. She refilled it without approaching him directly, setting it at the near end of the bar and letting him reach. Small geometry. It was the best she could do. At 10:15, he hadn't moved to leave. She was wiping down the far end when he spoke. "You've changed something," he said. Her cloth stopped. 1 beat, she resumed. "I'm busy," she said. The silence that followed had weight. A delta's silence, the kind that didn't press or demand, that simply remained present until the other person felt its shape. She had watched him use it on other wolves in this bar for 2 years. She had never had it turned on her. She kept her eyes on the oak and her hands moving. He left at 10:30, 40 minutes earlier than usual. She didn't watch him go. She heard the door and she stayed at the far end of the bar, and she felt the room change temperature by 1 specific degree when he was no longer in it, and she filed that information in the same place she was putting everything else she wasn't examining. The bar thinned out by 11. By 11:30 she had 2 wolves left, a Dunmore man she knew well, nursing his last drink slowly, and a Clochar wolf she didn't recognize, sitting alone near the door. Then Ruairi Clochar came in. He didn't come in often on Tuesdays. He preferred weekends, when the bar was fuller and he could occupy more of it. He came to the bar and ordered a whiskey, and she poured it, and he stood there in the particular way of a man who has something to say and is enjoying the architecture of not saying it yet. She waited. This was also the work. He picked up his glass, set it down. "Heard something interesting," he said. "The valley talks," she said. "It does." He turned the glass a quarter rotation. Be a shame if it started talking about whose side this place was already on. The Dunmore man at the end of the bar had gone still. Wren registered this and kept her face where she needed it, open, mild, unreadable. The howling pint doesn't have sides, she said. That's why you drink here. Ruary's mouth moved in something adjacent to a smile. For now, he said. He finished his whiskey. He left. The unexpected thing was not what he'd said. She had been calculating Closhar's response for a week, and a threat wrapped in pleasantry was well within the range of what she'd modeled. The unexpected thing was the Dunmore man at the end of the bar, Old Canal, who had been coming here for 6 years and arguing about fishing contracts, and never once involved himself in anything political. He waited until Ruary's footsteps faded from the stone outside. He's been asking about you, Canal said. Ruary, at the Closhar Sunday meeting. She went still for one controlled second. Asking what? Asking who you're friendly with these days. She nodded once, set a fresh glass on the bar in front of him. On the house. He took it without further comment. They both understood what had been exchanged. After close, she stood at the window that faced the valley. The hills were dark shapes against a slightly less dark sky. She had stood at this window 100 times. After difficult nights, after good ones, after nights that were neither, checking that the valley was still there and still hers to be part of. She tried to picture herself here in 5 years. The cold that moved through her chest was not about Finn Darcy. It was about the fact that her neutrality, the thing she had given up pack belonging to protect, the thing she had built this bar on, was not a legal structure. It was a biological condition, and her biology had just changed without asking her. The bar was hers, the valley was hers. None of it was as solid as she'd made it feel. She pressed her palm flat to the cold glass of the window. Outside, Dunmore Valley held its breath in the dark. Chapter 4. Mossy Hannigan hadn't put his bins out in 3 weeks. Finn noticed on his way past the absence of the 2 green bins that Mossy had positioned at the end of his drive every Thursday for 30 years, rain or otherwise. Small detail. The kind of thing that didn't mean anything on its own and meant everything in context. Finn had been doing this long enough to know the difference between a man who forgot his bins and a man whose bins were the first thing to go. He knocked. Mossy answered in yesterday's clothes. Just passing, Finn said. Mossy stepped back from the door. They sat in the kitchen for an hour. Finn drank bad tea and listened to a long, circular account of a dispute with the neighboring farmer over a fence line that had been in the wrong place for 20 years and had only now become intolerable. He tracked the subtext under the story, the loneliness dressed as grievance, the need for someone to sit in the kitchen and treat the fence as though it mattered. He treated the fence as though it mattered. When he left, Mossy was standing straighter. Finn logged the visit in his notebook, not the emotional content, never that, just the date and the duration and a single word that only he would understand. Monitor. He had 60-something wolves in his welfare remit. 14 currently had that word beside their names. A property dispute was next. 2 Dunmore families, the Keneallys and the Burkes, had been arguing about a shared lane for 8 months. Finn had mediated 3 sessions already. This one lasted 90 minutes and ended with the Keneally eldest agreeing to pay for resurfacing in exchange for winter access rights, which was the agreement they could have reached in session 1 if both families hadn't needed to feel heard for 7 sessions first. He wrote it up in the car, filed it to Orla's shared folder from his phone. He had done this for 3 years and he was good at it. And it was emptying him the way good work empties you when it asks for everything and gives back only the knowledge that it needed doing. The step-down request sat in his chest the way a decision sits when you've made it, and then started to wonder whether you made it for the right reason. He had filed it 6 weeks ago. He had told himself it was about capacity, about running dry, about needing to find out who he was when he wasn't managing everyone else's difficulty. Both things were true. Neither of them was the whole truth, and he was self-aware enough to know it. The quarterly welfare report was due to Orla by Friday. He drove to her office at the edge of the valley rather than emailing it, which he told himself was about the 2 flagged cases he wanted to discuss in person, and not about needing to be in a room with someone who knew him well enough to ask the right questions. Orla took the report and read the flagged cases and asked 3 precise questions, and he answered them. She was a compact, sharp-eyed woman who had been running this pack since before he'd taken the Delta role, and she had the specific quality of knowing when a conversation was done and when it was pretending to be done. "Anything else?" she said. His mouth opened. He had the hypothetical framed and ready, a bonded independent, pack convention, contestability of neutral status, and he closed it again. "No," he said, "that's everything." She held his gaze for 1 beat longer than the answer required, said nothing. He left. The village road back ran past the bar. The Howling Pint was closed on Wednesdays. It had always been closed on Wednesdays. The shutters were down on the front window. The sign above the door was dark. He had passed this building hundreds of times without it registering as anything other than a landmark. He stopped. There was a light on inside, a thin line of amber at the bottom of the door, the kind of light that comes from the back room rather than the bar itself. She was in there, working, probably, the ledger, the accounts, the 1,000 small maintenances that kept a bar functioning, the things no one saw her do. He stood on the pavement for a moment. The pull was a physical thing, low and specific and very patient, like a current that didn't need to hurry because it knew which way the water ran. His wolf had known from the first week. His wolf had been considerably less interested in restraint than the rest of him. He kept walking. This was the decision he made 6 times a day now, to let her have the space she was building between them without crowding it. She was working something out. He could feel her working it out, not her thoughts, never that, but the particular tension of a person in the middle of a calculation they hadn't finished. Pressing now would not help her finish it. It would only confirm her fear that the bond made her less than free. He got home, made food he didn't taste, sat with the welfare report open on his laptop and read it twice and added nothing. His phone lit up, Orla. He read the message twice. She wanted to meet, not about the welfare report, about the succession. The name she was considering for Delta was Padraic Carney, a Dunmore wolf of 31 who was capable and well-liked, and would perform the role adequately in the way that adequate was its own kind of failure. Padraic would file the reports. He would attend the meetings. He would not stand in Mossy Hannigan's kitchen drinking bad tea for an hour because he'd noticed the bins were in. Finn set the phone down. The step-down request was about finding out who he was outside this role. That reason was still true. The timing had just acquired a complication he hadn't factored. He looked at the ceiling for a long time. The light at the bottom of the bar door, the current that didn't need to hurry, Mossy's bins, Padraic Carney and his adequate reports. Everything had a cost. The question was what he was willing to carry. Chapter 5. 3 Clochar wolves walked in at 2 in the afternoon and sat down without being invited to. Not at the bar. At a table, the round one near the center of the floor, the one that put their backs to the wall and their eyes on the room. Ruairi Clochar first, then 2 she recognized as senior men from the Clochar Cooperative. They were not dressed for a casual drink. They were dressed for a meeting they had already decided the outcome of. Wren finished pulling the pint she was mid-pour and set it in front of old Seon at the bar, and took her time walking over. "Ryueri," she said, "gentlemen." "Ren." Ryueri had the particular ease of a man who had rehearsed his warmth. "Sit down with us a minute." She did not sit. She stood at the edge of the table with her hands loose at her sides. "What can I get you?" Ryueri smiled. "We're not here for a drink." The bar had 4 other wolves in it, Seon at the counter, a Breen couple near the fire, and a young Dunmore woman named Aoife who worked at the Valley School and came in Thursday afternoons, and had been doing so since she was 22. None of them were looking at the table. All of them were listening. Ryueri set his forearms on the table and leaned forward with the body language of a man delivering good news. The offer was structured as a favor. Kloshar Pack had resources, he said. The bar had a complication, he said. Not anything Ren had done, nothing like that. The Valley understood she'd built something good here. But complications had a way of growing, and Kloshar was in a position to resolve this one cleanly. A purchase, fair market price, fair terms, and Ren retained as manager with full operational control. The neutrality question dissolved because a pack-owned bar had no neutrality to lose. She heard every word clearly, and she heard the structure underneath the words more clearly still. "No," she said. Ryueri's expression didn't change. "Ren." "No, thank you." She kept her voice at the same temperature she used for last orders. "Is there anything else I can help you with today?" The 2 men beside Ryueri exchanged nothing visible. Ryueri sat back in his chair. He picked up his coat from the back of it with a slowness that was its own kind of message. They moved to the door. At the threshold, Ryueri turned. "Be a shame," he said, at a volume the whole bar could hold. If the Valley's other packs started wondering whose side this place was already on. The door closed. The bar held the silence for 3 full seconds. Then Seon lifted his pint and drank, and set it down, and the Breen couple resumed their conversation, and the room reassembled itself around the fact of what had just happened, and Ren walked back to the bar and stood behind it and picked up a cloth and wiped a surface that did not need wiping. Her hands were steady. She had trained them to be steady. The cloth moved in slow circles. The oak was cool and solid and known. Aoife appeared at the bar. She was 26, and she had soft eyes, and she had been coming here since she was young enough that Ren had known her before she fully understood what she was watching, and she set her empty glass on the bar and said, quietly, "Are you all right?" The question landed in a place Ren had not left open. "Fine," she said. "Same again." Aoife accepted the glass. She did not look convinced. She went back to her table without pressing, because she had enough of her mother in her to know when not to press, and that restraint was its own kind of kindness that Ren could not look at directly. She went to the back room. She sat on a crate. The back room held the things the bar ran on: crates, kegs, the old chest freezer, the shelving unit with its bulk supplies. It smelled of cold stone and cardboard and the yeast and metal smell of the keg lines. She had sat on this specific crate before. Not often. Enough to know its particular height and the way the edge pressed into the back of her thighs. She sat for 4 minutes. She did not cry. The pressure behind her eyes was a specific weight, and she held it there through the simple mechanical act of keeping her jaw set and her breathing even, and after 4 minutes it receded enough. Not enough to be gone, enough to be manageable. She stood up. She went back out. Aoife had left exact change on the table, and a small, neat stack of coasters she'd squared off without being asked. The way people tidy without knowing they're doing it when they want to leave something better than they found it. The corner table was visible from where Ren stood, the unassigned one by the left window, empty the way it always was. She had never assigned it because she had never examined why she had never assigned it. She had told herself it was a floor management decision, a buffer table, useful to have available. She closed at 11. She went through the routine: taps, lights, chairs. The routine was the thing you held when the rest of the day had been taken apart. She had built the routine the same year she built the bar, and it had not failed her yet. She unlocked the front door to leave. On the doorstep, a covered dish, ceramic with a plate laid over the top, still faintly warm through the ceramic. No note. She stood in the doorway with cold air at her back and the dish in her hands, and she did not move for a long moment. The valley was dark and quiet, and the hills were their usual shapes against the sky, patient and indifferent. She knew who had left it. She brought it inside. She set it on the bar, the oak she had laid herself, the surface she had sanded and sealed over a single long weekend 6 years ago, when the contractor had told her it would take a week, and she had decided she didn't have a week. She took the plate off the top. She sat on the bar stool, on the customer side, and she ate. Chapter 6. The community hall smelled like every pack meeting she had never attended. Wood smoke and old timber and the particular density of wolves gathered in a closed space, not unpleasant, not threatening, the specific warmth of bodies that share a frequency. Wren had been in this hall twice before, both times to drop something off, never to stay. She knew that. She hadn't known it would feel like this, like a sound she recognized from before she had words for it. She took a seat at the back and told herself it was practical. Better sight lines, easy exit. The hall held 40 wolves. She knew 32 of them by drink order, by Tuesday face, by the specific way each of them carried difficulty when they thought no one was watching. Here they sat in rows and argued about a car park, and she was seeing them from an angle she had never used before. Orla was late, a difficult calving, someone said. Finn was running the meeting. She had not expected that to be what it was. He stood at the front of the hall without performing it. No raised voice, no authority on display. The ease of someone who had done this enough times that the room's attention had become unremarkable to him. He moved through the agenda with the same quality she had watched him bring to the bar's informal welfare pipeline. Methodical, unhurried, leaving space for people to arrive at things themselves rather than being directed toward them. The car park item resolved in 4 minutes. The event bar usage item, the reason Orla had asked Wren here, took 12. Finn presented the options without editorializing. The hall debated. He let them. When the debate circled back on itself the third time, he said, without raising his voice, "We've covered this ground twice. Do we have a preference or do we need more time?" The room chose. He noted it. He moved on. She was watching him the way you watch something that has been in your peripheral vision for 2 years finally come into focus. Then the Keneally and Burke families arrived, the same agenda item. The Lane dispute. She recognized it from Finn's Tuesday visit 2 weeks back. She had heard it in the particular way he had said property matter without elaborating, which was how he always referred to things that were still live. The two families occupied opposite sides of the hall with the practiced arrangement of people who had been doing so for months. The older Keneally woman spoke first. Her voice was controlled and her grievance was not. The Burke eldest responded. The room tightened. Finn let it run for 90 seconds. Then, "Mayor, hold on." Not a command, an instruction delivered quietly enough that complying felt like her own choice. She stopped. He looked at the Burke eldest. "I want to hear the full thing from both sides. Mayor, you'll have the floor back." He paused. "Owen, what's the Lane actually about?" The question landed differently than the room expected. Not what's your position, what's it about? Owen Burke opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. What came out was not about the Lane. Wren sat very still. Finn let him speak. He didn't write anything down. He tracked Owen's face with the attention of someone assembling something, and when Owen finished, Finn looked at Mare Keneally and said nothing, and she pressed her mouth together and said, "The same." The room breathed differently after that. The resolution took 6 minutes. The meeting closed at 9. The hall emptied in the gradual way of people who had been in a warm room and weren't in a hurry to leave it. Wren moved toward the door and stepped outside, and the cold hit the back of her neck, and she stood on the stone step and looked at the valley. Finn came out 2 minutes later. He stood beside her, not close, not distant. "Thanks for coming," he said. Orla asked. "I know." The silence held for a moment. She watched the dark line of the hills. "Ruari Clashar came to the bar," she said, "with 2 of his seniors." Finn went still. She told him the shape of it, the offer, the framing, the parting comment at the door. She kept her voice at the same register she used for welfare observations. Clinical, managed. When she finished, he said, "That's not a business offer." "No. That's a message." "I know." The cold settled between them. Somewhere below the village, a dog barked twice and stopped. Finn's hands were in his coat pockets, and his jaw held the particular tension of a man keeping something behind his teeth. He did not say what his wolf wanted to say, and she felt the restraint of it like pressure against her sternum. "What are you going to do?" he said. "Work it out." He nodded once, accepted this, did not offer to help, which was, she registered it without nomming it, the exact right thing. He knew what an offer of help would mean to her. He had chosen not to make her refuse it. They stood until the cold became something that required a decision. She said goodnight. He said goodnight. She walked to her car across the gravel, and he went back inside. She sat behind the wheel, without starting the engine. She had told him before she told Dara. Before she told Orla, who was the logical person to tell, Orla whose pack, whose meeting she had attended tonight, whose knowledge of the Clashar situation was directly relevant and actionable. Finn had been the first call. She had not decided that. She had not decided any of it. She started the engine and pulled out of the gravel and drove the valley road home in the dark, and the heat from the car built slowly, and she sat inside it the whole way. Chapter 7. The shelf had been pulling from the wall for 8 months. Wren had looked at it every morning and made a note to fix it and open the bar instead. 3 brackets, 2 of them loose, the whole unit listing 2 degrees to the left in a way that was not yet dangerous and would eventually be. She knew this about herself, the capacity to tolerate a slow problem indefinitely while managing acute ones with precision. The shelf was still there. The storm had arrived. She had been snowed in before. The cot in the back room existed for exactly this reason. She had put it there in her second winter when a freeze caught her working late, and the valley road became impassable before she reached her car. She had supplies. She had heat. She had the bar to herself and a backlog of maintenance tasks, and she had been, until 2 hours in, entirely prepared for this to be a productive 36 hours. Then knuckles on the door. She opened it, and Finn Darcy was on the step in a coat that had accumulated an inch of snow across the shoulders, carrying a kit bag, looking not remotely surprised to find himself here. 3 elderly pack members on the street, he said. "I know," she said. "Check them all." He lifted the kit bag slightly. "Roads are gone." She stepped back from the door. He came in, stamped the snow from his boots, set the bag down, and looked at the bar with the assessing attention of someone calculating what a space needed rather than what it contained. She watched him clock the fire low, needing fuel, and he went to the stack beside the hearth without asking and built it up, and she went behind the bar and put the kettle on, and neither of them made a thing of it. The domesticity of it was the problem. They ate at 3 in the afternoon, soup from the kitchen stock, bread from the freezer, the kind of meal that required no discussion and produced no particular warmth except the kind that comes from heat and hunger being addressed together. He washed the bowls. She dried them. The bar held the fire's sound, and outside the snow was a pressure against the windows, thick and patient. "The shelf is pulling," he said. 8 months, she said. He looked at it. "Have you got a drill?" She had a drill. They fixed the shelf in 40 minutes, him on the ladder, her holding the bracket flush against the wall, his hands and hers occasionally occupying the same 12 inches of space around the same fixing point, with a practicality that should have been straightforward and was not, because her wolf had been quiet since he walked in, and the quiet was worse than the straining had been. Quieter, more certain, more like a conclusion than a question. She held the bracket. His hand came past hers to check the fixing. The side of his wrist grazed her knuckle. She counted to 3 and moved to the next bracket. Evening came in fast, the way it does when the sky has been white all day and drops its last light without ceremony. They sat by the fire. She asked about the step-down, because it was something to ask that was not the other thing, and he told her not defensively, not performing casualness, but with the specific honesty of someone who has turned a question over long enough that the answer has worn smooth. "I've been the person who holds things," he said, "for a long time. And I forgot to check whether I was still choosing it." The fire moved. She turned her glass in her hands. "I left my birth pack at 22, she said. She had not planned to say it. "Not a bad pack, good pack. I left because belonging to it required me to keep being the person they decided I was." He said nothing. He did not fill the silence with comfort. "I built the bar so I could belong to the valley without being held by any part of it." She paused. That felt like freedom for a long time. "And now," he said. She didn't answer, and the not answering was itself an answer, and they both knew it. The fire settled lower. The storm pressed the windows. She brought more wood, and he moved his boots from the hearth to make room, and somewhere in the second hour past midnight, she was at the bar going through the accounts, and she looked up, and he was asleep in the chair. Not uneasy sleep, not the watchful half-rest of someone in an unfamiliar space. His head had dropped to the side, his hands loose in his lap, his whole body given over to the chair and the fire's warmth with the trust of a man who felt, without deciding to, that the room was safe. Her wolf went quiet. Not the strained quiet of suppression. The deep quiet of something that has been looking for a particular thing and found it and has no further need to search. She sat at the bar in the dark, and her hands were still on the account book, and she understood, with a clarity that arrived without permission, exactly what the quiet meant. She had been afraid of the bond, pulling her toward him. She had not calculated for this, for the bond settling, for the specific, terrible piece of it. Morning arrived gray and cold, and the roads were passable by 8. He was awake before her, coffee made, his coat on and his bag packed, and the chair returned to its position by the fire with a precision that meant he had done it deliberately, leaving no impression. She walked him to the door. He stopped on the step and turned. "I'm going to tell Orla I want to withdraw the step-down request," he said. She went still. "Why?" He looked at her for a moment, the clear gray-green of his eyes in the flat morning light, steady and direct and not performing anything at all. "Because I've figured out what I want to stay for." He walked into the snow. She stood in the open doorway, and the cold came in around her, and she did not close the door for a long time. Chapter 8. Dara called at 1:30 on a Thursday afternoon, and Wren knew from the first second of silence before she spoke. "Tell me you've already heard this," Dara said. She hadn't. Dara told her in the careful way of someone delivering information they wish they weren't carrying. The formal grievance, Rueri's name on it, the specific framing, bad faith intelligence gathering. A supposedly neutral bar used as a pipeline between an independent wolf and a ranked Dunmore Delta. 2 years of welfare observations reframed as surveillance. The bond cited as evidence of prior arrangement. Wren stood behind her own bar in the middle of a Thursday service and kept her face where she needed it and said, "When did this file?" "Yesterday morning," Dara said. "Wren, I'll call you back." She served the next 3 customers. She cleared a table. She did the things the hour required because the bar was open and people were in it, and she had not built 6 years of this to let Rueri Kloshar hollow her out in the middle of a Thursday. The cold in her chest was not about the legal exposure. It was about the pipeline. The 2 years of quiet, careful, useful work, the observations she had handed to Finn not because the bond existed, not because of anything between them, but because she had watched wolves fall through gaps and she had been in a position to help close them. That work was the thing she was most proud of. The thing that had made her feel, without having to name it, that she was genuinely part of the valley. Not neutral above it, part of it. Kloshar had taken that and made it a weapon. Orla called Finn in at 10 that morning. He had known it was coming. The grievance had landed on Orla's desk the previous day, and he had read the filed copy. Pack law required disclosure to named parties. And he had sat with it for 24 hours and arrived at Orla's office with everything he intended to say already ordered. He did not deny the pipeline. Orla sat across from him with the grievance document on the desk between them and listened while he laid it out, every wolf, every outcome, every intervention that had happened because Wren had noticed something he would not have caught through official channels alone. He named Mossy Hannigan. He named the young Breen wolf from the Thursday evenings. He named 4 others. Orla was quiet for a long time. "The grievance isn't entirely wrong," she said. "No," he said. An independent wolf providing welfare intelligence to a ranked Delta, while a bond between them was active and undisclosed. The bond was not active when the pipeline was established. Rueri doesn't need it to have been. Orla pressed her fingers together. He needs it to be unprovable that it wasn't. The distinction landed in the room like a dropped weight. Finn kept his jaw loose and his hands still, and looked at the document that had turned 2 years of good work into a contestable arrangement. "What's the process?" he said. "I respond within 14 days. Acknowledge the grievance, outline the pack's position, propose a resolution pathway." Orla paused. "Finn, the bond, when were you going to?" "When she was ready." Another silence. Orla looked at him for a long moment with the particular expression of a woman who had known him for 3 years and was recalibrating something. "Does she know about the grievance?" Orla said. He had intended to tell her. He had been building toward telling her, finding the right footing, not wanting to drop it on her before he understood the full shape of it. "I'll go tonight," he said. Wren closed the bar at 9, an hour early. She turned the sign, locked the front, moved through the closing routine on the outside of herself, taps, lights, chairs, and when it was done, she did not go to the back room and she did not go to the door. She went to the corner table. She pulled out the chair and sat in it for the first time in 6 years of owning the floor it stood on. The table was smaller from this side. The bar looked different from here. The oak surface, the bottles, the amber light above the optics. She had stood behind that bar for 6 years watching people bring their difficulty to this side of the room, and she had managed them from a position of structure and competence and careful distance. She sat with her hands on the table and looked at the bar she had built. Her phone had Finn's name in it. She had not called it. She had not called it because the grievance named him as the other half of something that was now under formal review, and because calling him would confirm what the grievance already alleged, and because, underneath both of those reasons, in the place she didn't examine, she was sitting in the cold feeling of someone who had learned a hard thing from the wrong person. The door opened. She had not locked it. She noted this without surprise. She had gone through the whole closing routine and not locked the front door, which she had never once forgotten in 6 years, and she was not going to think about what that meant. Finn came in. He stopped when he saw her at the corner table. He crossed the floor without turning on a light and sat down in the chair across from her, and the table held the dark between them. Neither of them spoke. The bar was quiet the way it is only after close. The particular silence of a room that has held a day's worth of other people's noise, and is now empty of everything except what the two people in it brought with them. "I found out from Dora," she said. Finn closed his eyes. The silence that followed was not the silence of nothing being said. It was the silence of something breaking along a line, so clean it made no sound at all. Chapter 9. Orla's door was open. Finn knocked anyway. She was at her desk with the grievance document in front of her and a second document beside it that he didn't recognize. She looked up. She did not look surprised to see him. She gestured to the chair across from her, and he sat down and she put her pen down and waited. "I'm withdrawing the step-down request," he said. Orla's expression did not change. She reached for a notepad. "The succession candidate," he said. "Padraic Carney." "Yes." "He won't run the pipeline." "Finn." "Not because he's incapable, because it won't occur to him that it's part of the role." He kept his voice at the same level he used in mediation, not pressing, not performing, the register of a man delivering information rather than making a case. "Mossy Hannigan, the bins. Padraic files welfare reports. He doesn't notice bins." Orla set her pen down. She looked at him for a long moment. "That's one reason," she said. "Yes." The second thing sat between them. He let it sit for 3 seconds, and then he put it on the table because that was why he was here, and managing the order of it was its own form of cowardice. "The bond is real," he said. "Wren Calloway, it's been active for 6 weeks. I knew before she did, and I didn't disclose it because she hadn't, and it wasn't mine to disclose before she was ready." He paused. "That was my judgment call. I'm not asking you to agree with it." Orla was very still. "The pipeline predates the bond by 2 years," he said. "Every observation she passed to me I can account for. Every wolf it touched I can name. None of it was coordinated. None of it was agenda. It was 2 people in the same valley who both noticed when someone was struggling and found a way to act on it that worked." He placed both hands flat on his thighs. "The grievance is not entirely wrong about what we did. It is entirely wrong about why." He had carried the managed version of this for 6 weeks, and he was done carrying it. Orla picked up her pen, set it down again. "Ruari has 14 days for a response from me," she said. "I know. This changes what I can say in it." She looked at the second document. "Full disclosure from a named party, voluntarily submitted, tends to reframe a grievance. It removes the implication of concealment." "That's not why I'm telling you." "I know that too." She held his gaze. "Finn, she came to see me." He went still. "Yesterday morning," Orla said. "Before you, she came in with a proposal, a declared affiliation model, written out specific terms for a neutral charter that reframes the bar's status through transparency rather than independence." A pause. "She didn't ask for help. She presented a solution." The air in the room had a new quality. He sat with it. "Did she ask for help?" he said. Orla's mouth moved, not quite a smile. "No," she said. That's how you know it's real. He stood. She was already reaching for the phone. The bar was open. He could see her through the front window, behind the counter, phone to her ear, the particular posture of someone in a negotiation they are steering rather than surviving. He went in. She clocked him with one glance and held up a single finger without breaking her sentence. He sat at the bar and waited. She was talking to someone about contract terms. Her voice was level and specific. She was not asking for anything. She was explaining a position, the way you explain a position when you have already decided it and are informing rather than requesting. He heard the phrase conflict of interest disclosure and formal documentation and effective immediately. He heard her say, "I'm initiating this, not responding to it." That's a distinction that matters. He had come here to tell her something before she heard it another way, and she had already moved past the thing he came to tell her. He sat with that, turned his glass between his hands. The bar was mid-morning, quiet, two wolves at the far end, neither paying attention. She ended the call, set the phone on the bar. The brass key at her collarbone caught the light when she turned. She looked at him. "I told Orla everything," he said. "This morning, the bond, the pipeline, the parts that reflect badly on my judgment. I didn't manage it." The silence stretched. Her hands were flat on the oak. He watched her process it, not the content, she already knew the content, but the fact of it. The fact that he had walked into Orla's office and put it all down without shaping it first. "I'm going to lose the Ironshore contract," she said. "I know. I called them this morning, initiated the withdrawal myself." Her voice was even. "Conflict of interest, formally documented, effective immediately. They were decent about it. Recommended me for 2 commissions outside Dunmore territory." "I know," he said. "Orla told me what you were building." She absorbed this. Something in her jaw moved. "I built the solution anyway," she said. "I know that too." The bar held them. Outside, a car passed on the valley road, and the sound of it faded and the quiet came back in. Neither of them moved. The corner table was behind them both, visible in the mirror above the optics, the empty chair on the far side of it catching the amber light. 2 people who had walked into the same morning from different directions and arrived at the same place without coordinating it. Her hands were still on the oak. His were around his glass. The distance between them across the bar was the same distance it had always been. It had never felt this small. Chapter 10. Orla read the charter proposal, without speaking for 4 minutes. Wren sat across from her and did not fill the silence. She had written the document over 2 days, not drafted, written, the way you write something when you know the argument has to hold its own weight without you in the room to defend it. 12 pages, precise terms. A declared affiliation model that documented her bond with a Dunmore Delta openly, established the Howling Pint's neutrality as a structural and procedural condition rather than a biological one, and gave all 3 packs a formal mechanism for raising concerns about that neutrality if they believed it had been compromised. She was not asking permission. She had not come here to ask permission. Orla turned the last page, set it down. "You wrote this yourself," Orla said. "Yes." "No legal help." Britton in Sligo looked it over. She made 2 suggestions. I took one. Orla pressed her fingers together and looked at the document, and then at Wren with the expression of a woman recalibrating the size of something she had already thought was large. 3 days, Orla said. "I need 3 days." Wren stood. "That's fine." She left the document on the desk and walked out into the valley morning, and the cold hit her face, and she stood on the pavement for a moment and breathed it in. Her hands were steady. The brass key was warm at her collarbone from where her coat had held the heat against it. She had built the argument. She had walked it in. The rest was not hers to control, and she had made her peace with that on the first night of writing when she understood that the charter would either hold on its merits or it wouldn't, and in either case she would know she had answered Ruari Clashar with something more durable than refusal. She went to open the bar. Clashar's formal objection arrived on day 2. She heard about it through Orla, not through the Valley, which meant Orla was managing the information flow, which meant Orla had already decided something. Breen's endorsement arrived on day 3. She had not expected Breen. The Breen Alpha, a quiet, long-memoried woman named Sorcha who had been running her coastal pack for 16 years, sent a 2-paragraph letter to Orla that Orla read to Ren over the phone. Sorcha did not editorialize. She cited 3 specific occasions over 6 years when the Howling Pint had served as neutral ground for interpack matters that would otherwise have required formal mediation. She named outcomes. She supported the charter on the grounds that transparency was more reliable than biology, and that the Valley had already been benefiting from exactly this structure for years without documentation. Ren sat with the phone against her ear for a long moment after Orla finished reading. "She never told me," Ren said. "People don't always tell you when you've helped them," Orla said. "They remember, though." The charter was ratified on a Friday. Clashar's objection lost weight when Breen's endorsement was entered into the formal record. 2 packs in support outweighed 1 in opposition under the Valley's Interpack Convention, and Ruari's grievance was formally resolved with a notation that the matter had been addressed through structural remedy rather than disciplinary finding. No fault recorded, no wolf censured. The bar was hers. The Ironshore contract was already gone. She had closed that herself, cleanly, the week before. The 2 commissions Ironshore had recommended came through within the fortnight. The net loss was a number she had calculated and decided she could carry. She had written it in the accounts ledger on a Tuesday night, closed the book, and not looked at it again. Some costs were just costs. You paid them and you kept the thing that mattered. The salt meal was on a Wednesday evening. She heard about it through Aoife, who mentioned it the way you mention a thing that is common knowledge. A small one, 6 wolves, the completion of a fencing project on the Northfield. Dunmore cooperative work, done and closed. Ren had never attended a salt meal, uninvited. She knew the custom. Everyone in the Valley knew the custom. You showed up, you sat down, and if you were not asked to leave, you were held. An acknowledgement without a ceremony. The most honest thing one wolf could offer another. She closed the bar at 8. She hung up her apron. She walked 4 streets to the house where the meal was being held, a Dunmore family's kitchen, warm light in the windows, the sound of voices inside. She stood on the step for 1 moment, and then she knocked and opened the door. 6 wolves around a table. The smell of salt and food and wood smoke, and the specific warmth of people who had worked together and were now sitting in the fact of it. 5 faces turned toward her with varying expressions of surprise. Finn looked up from the far end of the table. He did not look surprised. He reached beside him and lifted his jacket from the back of the empty chair and set it over his own seat back in a single unhurried movement, and the chair was there, and he did not make it a moment, and she crossed the kitchen and sat down. The conversation resumed around her. Someone passed bread. Someone else argued about the quality of the fencing wire, which had apparently been a source of dispute since the project began. The table was slightly oversalted in the way it was supposed to be, and she ate, and said little and listened, and the warmth of the room settled into her shoulders like something she hadn't known she'd been holding against. At some point, she looked up and through the window across the street, she could see the front of the Howling Pint. The lights were on. She had left them on when she locked up the low amber of the bar light, visible through the gap in the shutters. The building sat on the street the way it always had, solid and known, the sign above the door in the dark, the stone front that she had repointed herself in the first autumn. It was waiting for her to come back. She looked at it for a long moment. Finn's shoulder was 4 inches from hers. He was talking to the wolf on his other side about the fence wire. His coat was on the back of his chair, and the sleeve of it rested against her arm, and he had not moved it, and she had not moved away. Both things were true at the same time. The bar across the street, the table under her hands, the salt on her tongue from food that tasted like work done and cost acknowledged, and the valley going on as it always had, patient, specific, indifferent to everything except whether you showed up. She had shown up. She reached for the bread. She stayed.